The groom refused her at the altar, so the Lycan king stepped forward. "Then she's mine." Its spires touched the clouds, gilded with gold and silver, reflecting the pride of a kingdom that prided itself on wealth and power. Yet beneath the glittering halls, whispers of fear and jealousy threaded through the corridors. For centuries, Urindor had been a place of order, but even in the grandest palace, secrets were never far from the surface. Lady Seraphine walked through the marble halls of the cathedral, her gown trailing behind her like a river of silk. Every step echoed off the stone walls, a sound that seemed to mark her life in rhythm. Today was meant to be her triumph, the moment she had been prepared for since childhood. Her parents, noble and strict, had arranged her marriage to Lord Alaric, a man admired for his intelligence and elegance. The court expected this union to solidify power, to join two influential houses. Yet as Seraphine stepped onto the altar, her heart did not feel the joy she had imagined. Instead, a quiet unease settled in her chest. She scanned the crowd, nobles with masks of curiosity, friends with polite smiles, and enemies hiding sly, calculating glances. Every eye seemed to judge, waiting for the perfect moment to witness either glory or scandal. Lord Alaric stood tall, handsome, and composed. His dark hair caught the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, and his eyes met Seraphine's for a brief, fleeting moment. She had expected warmth, affection, reassurance, but in that gaze she saw something else: hesitation, a flicker of doubt that did not belong in a man about to pledge his life to another. The priest began the ceremony, his voice calm and steady, reciting words that had been repeated in this cathedral for generations. Seraphine swallowed hard, her fingers clenching in front of her. When it came time for Alaric to speak his vow, the room seemed to hold its breath. And then it happened. Alaric's voice was soft, barely audible at first, but it cut through the silence like a dagger. "I cannot." The words echoed through the cathedral. Gasps filled the air, the ornate walls carrying the sound like a cruel chorus. Seraphine's heart skipped, then plummeted. She stared at him, disbelief and humiliation mingling into a sharp ache. "I cannot," he repeated, his voice firmer now, yet devoid of any warmth. "I cannot marry you, Seraphine. I do not love you. I cannot pretend." Time seemed to stop. The faces of the guests blurred in a haze of shock and gossip. Some whispered, others murmured prayers, and a few looked on with thinly veiled delight. Seraphine's hands trembled, her lips parting, but no words came. She wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but her voice had deserted her. Her carefully arranged life, the plans she had followed since childhood, the security she had believed she could rely on, all crumbled in a heartbeat. She wanted to run, to flee from the shame and confusion, but the cathedral doors were too far. Her parents' eyes were wide with disbelief, their faces masks of fury and sorrow. Then, in the midst of her devastation, the cathedral doors banged open. A gust of cold air swept through the hall, carrying with it the scent of pine, earth, and something wild, something ancient. The murmurs of the crowd died to whispers, then silence. A figure stepped into the light. He was massive, taller than any man in the court, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to command the air itself. His hair was dark as midnight, but his eyes glowed with an intense golden light, like the sun caught in molten metal. His features were sharp, regal, and yet there was a raw, untamed quality that set him apart from any human being. He moved with an ease that suggested strength, grace, and danger all at once. The nobles froze. The priest paused mid-gesture. Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. "I am Kaelin," the figure said, his voice deep, resonant, and steady. "The Lycan king." A murmur swept through the cathedral. Whispers of curses, prophecies, and legends tangled in the air. Lycans were creatures of shadow and myth, said to rule the forests beyond the mountains. They were both feared and respected, for their strength was unmatched and their honor unbreakable. Kaelin's gaze fell on Seraphine. His eyes softened, though only slightly, as if he could see the turmoil in her heart. "Then she's mine," he declared, his words carrying a weight that silenced even the most scandalized noble. The hall erupted in panic. Servants dropped trays, nobles scrambled for composure, and Alaric's face turned pale with anger and fear. He tried to step forward, but Kaelin's presence alone seemed to push him back. Seraphine's mind raced. Who was this man? How could he claim her, simply because her groom had refused her? Fear mingled with fascination. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, powerful, commanding, yet there was a sense of justice, of honor in the way he spoke. Despite herself, her curiosity stirred, battling against her shock and anger. Kaelin did not speak again immediately. He gestured toward the cathedral doors. "Come with me, Lady Seraphine. Your life has changed whether you wish it or not. It is safer with me than with those who would see you humiliated." Seraphine's first instinct was to refuse. She was a noble woman. She had duties, expectations, a name to protect. But as she glanced back at Alaric, who fumed in silence, and then at her parents' horrified faces, she realized that remaining would offer nothing but shame and danger. With a trembling hand, she allowed Kaelin to guide her outside. The air was sharp and cold, scented with pine and wet earth. The streets of Urindor seemed smaller in the presence of the Lycan king. She could feel the strength beneath his hand, the power he carried effortlessly. Her pulse quickened, not with fear alone, but with an unexplainable stir of something deeper, a connection that tugged at her heart. They rode through shadowed streets and over bridges that spanned rushing rivers, until they reached the edge of the Moonville woods. Beyond the city walls, the forest rose like a wall of black and silver, its trees ancient and towering. There, hidden from the eyes of mortals, stood Kaelin's fortress, hewn from obsidian and stone, glimmering faintly under the setting sun. "This is your new home," Kaelin said, his golden eyes scanning her face. "Here you are safe. Here you will learn the ways of my world and perhaps understand your place within it." Seraphine's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The stories of Lycans were not tales for children. They were legends filled with danger, magic, and curses. Yet standing before Kaelin, she realized that her life had been lifted from one form of confinement into another. She had been abandoned at the altar, only to be claimed by a creature of myth and power. The gates of the fortress opened with a low, rumbling sound, as if the building itself recognized Kaelin's command. Shadows seemed to bow, flickering across walls carved with ancient runes. The interior was vast and dark, lit with a soft silver glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Seraphine could hear the distant sound of water, the echo of wings, and the low hum of something alive in the stone. Kaelin led her through the halls, speaking little, yet every movement suggested authority and careful respect. "You are not a prisoner," he said finally, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged corridor. "You are under my protection. But understand this, here, your choices are your own, yet nothing will escape the eyes of those who dwell in Moonville." Seraphine wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand explanations. Yet the weight of the day, the broken vows, the public shame, the sudden intrusion of the Lycan king, rendered her silent. Her mind was a storm of confusion, fear, and a strange, reluctant fascination. Finally, they reached a room that overlooked the forest. The moon rose above the trees, casting silver light through tall windows. The sight took her breath away. The forest seemed alive, almost whispering her name. Kaelin stepped close, not threatening but deliberate. His presence was immense, yet he did not touch her. "You may resist me," he said softly, "and I will not force you, but your life has changed. The world you knew is gone, and the one before you is both dangerous and magnificent. Tell me, will you fight your fate or will you embrace it?" Seraphine's heart pounded. She wanted to refuse, to retreat to what was left of her former life. Yet something in Kaelin's eyes, a mix of power, longing, and quiet reverence, made her pause. Perhaps she had been waiting for a moment like this, though she did not know it. The night deepened outside, the forest whispering secrets older than any human memory. Seraphine realized that whatever choice she made now, nothing would ever be the same. And as Kaelin's golden gaze held hers, the first thread of their entwined destinies began to weave itself, silently, inexorably, under the watchful eyes of the Moonville woods. Cliffhanger. Kaelin knelt before her, a gesture both commanding and respectful. "Resist me if you wish, Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice low and mesmerizing. "But your heart has already begun to answer, whether you know it or not." The fortress of Moonville Woods was alive with quiet movement. Shadows stretched along the obsidian walls, lit by a silver glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Lady Seraphine moved cautiously through the grand corridors, her fingers brushing the carved runes that told stories older than the city of Erendor itself. Every step made her feel both smaller and more aware of the power surrounding her. Kaelin, the Lycan king, walked beside her. His presence was immense, not only because of his size but because of the weight of centuries in his gaze. Unlike humans, his emotions were sharp and intense but controlled. He did not need to speak to command attention. The air itself seemed to bend around him. Yet, despite his strength, there was a patient respect in the way he regarded her. "This place is unlike any you have known," Kaelin said, his voice low but steady, echoing slightly against the stone walls. "The Lycans value strength, honor, and loyalty. You will need to understand these if you are to remain safe." Seraphine's eyes widened as they passed through a great hall. The walls were lined with banners depicting wolves and the phases of the moon, each thread shimmering as though woven with starlight. At the far end, a massive hearth glowed, though the fire seemed to burn with a strange silver flame. The scent of pine and smoke filled the air, a reminder of the wilderness outside. "Safe?" she asked, her voice tentative. "From what?" Kaelin's golden eyes met hers. "From those who would take what is not theirs, and from yourself." Seraphine blinked. His words were cryptic, but she sensed a deeper meaning. Perhaps it was not only Alaric, the man who had humiliated her at the altar, who threatened her, but the world itself, its judgments, its schemes, and the power struggles that never ceased, whether human or Lycan. For the next days, Seraphine was shown the ways of Moonville. She learned the rituals of the Lycans, from the quiet discipline of dawn training to the intricate ceremonies beneath the full moon. Kaelin watched her carefully, guiding her without forcing her, allowing her to stumble and learn on her own. In the forest, she witnessed Lycans transform under moonlight, humans and wolves merging into forms that seemed impossible. Strength and speed, heightened senses, and an aura of danger radiated from them. Seraphine felt fear, yes, but also a strange awe. In this world, power was not only feared, it was respected, and Kaelin was its embodiment. One night they walked under a crescent moon along the edge of the forest. Mist rose from the ground, curling like smoke through the trees. Kaelin was quiet at first, his gaze scanning the shadows. Then he spoke. "You wonder why I claimed you," he said softly. "You think it is because Alaric failed, but there is more." Seraphine's brow furrowed. "More? The prophecy," Kaelin continued. "It speaks of a noblewoman whose heart will cross between worlds, human and Lycan. She will be challenged, betrayed, and tested. And through her choices, the balance between our worlds will shift. That woman is you." Seraphine's pulse quickened. Prophecy, destiny. She had always believed in her own intelligence and planning, in the life she had prepared for herself. And yet here was a world beyond her understanding, where forces older than her kingdom decided the fate of lives. "You're saying my life is not my own," she whispered, the mist swirling around her like a veil. Kaelin's gaze softened, but only slightly. "It is your own if you are brave enough to take it, but you will be tested. Danger waits not just outside these walls, but inside hearts, in shadows, and in choices." Days passed, and Seraphine began to feel an unexpected bond with the Lycan king. At first, it was fear. His strength was undeniable, and the rumors of his past victories were terrifying. But as they spent time together, she saw the depth beneath the ferocity. He cared for his people, protected the weak, and carried a loneliness that had lasted centuries. One afternoon, Kalen took her to a library carved into the heart of the fortress. Shelves of ancient scrolls and books lined the walls, their knowledge glowing faintly in the silver light. "These are the histories of our world," he said, gesturing to the scrolls, "and the magic that runs through it. You must understand this if you are to survive, and if you are to choose wisely." Seraphine approached a scroll, tracing the letters with her fingers. "Magic so real?" she asked. "I thought it was only stories." Kalen smiled faintly, a rare expression that softened his harsh features. "Stories are only stories to those who have never seen them. Here, reality bends, shadows listen, spirits watch, choices have weight." As they spent hours in study, a subtle tension began to grow between them. Not of desire, not yet, but of mutual respect and understanding. Kalen's presence was commanding, but he did not impose. Seraphine's spirit, fiery and clever, intrigued him. She challenged him, asked questions, and sometimes even argued. Each interaction drew them closer, though neither dared to acknowledge it. Yet even in this secluded sanctuary, danger lurked. Word had spread through Urendor of the failed wedding and the appearance of the Lycan king. Alaric, humiliated and furious, sought to reclaim Seraphine, but he was not alone. A rival noble, jealous of both Seraphine's status and Alaric's failure, had allied with forbidden magic, something dark and unnatural. One night, as the full moon rose high, a sudden attack reached the fortress. Shadows twisted unnaturally, striking at the walls with blackened claws that did not belong to any human hand. The Lycans rallied, their roars echoing through the night, but the threat was unlike anything they had faced in centuries. Kalen moved with terrifying grace, shielding Seraphine as he dispatched attackers with swift, precise strength. She watched, heart pounding, as he fought not only with physical power but with an authority that commanded even the darkest forces to pause. "Stay close to me," Kalen instructed, his golden eyes scanning the chaos. "Do not run, do not hide, trust me." Seraphine nodded, gripping the edge of her cloak, fear mingled with awe. This was the man who had stepped into her life unbidden, who had claimed her in a world that had rejected her. And now, in the heart of danger, she realized the depth of his power, and perhaps the depth of his care. The battle raged, shadows striking again and again, yet the fortress held. Kalen's pack fought with ferocity and loyalty, and together they forced the intruders back into the night. Seraphine's lungs burned from the cold, her hands trembled, but she remained at Kalen's side. When the last shadow dissolved, Kalen turned to her. His face was serious, but his eyes softened as he gently lifted her chin. "You are safe," he said, "for now." Seraphine swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Kalen's expression darkened. "The world does not forgive weakness. They will come again. And when they do, you must be ready and you must trust me completely." In the quiet that followed, as the fortress settled and the silver moonlight bathed them, a strange closeness grew. Fear had drawn them together, yes, but also respect and understanding. Seraphine felt it stirring in her heart, a reluctant recognition that Kalen's world, as dangerous as it was, offered something her old life never could: truth, strength, and perhaps even the beginnings of connection. As she looked into his golden eyes, she wondered if destiny had brought her here not to be claimed, but to learn, to grow, and maybe, in time, to choose. Cliffhanger. That night, as the fortress slept under the full moon, Seraphine awoke to find a soft glow in her room. Kalen stood at the window, his gaze distant and thoughtful. "The shadows you saw tonight," he murmured, "were not only those of our enemies. There is a greater darkness waiting, and it knows you are here." Seraphine's heart raced. The world she thought she understood was only beginning to reveal its true shape. The first light of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Moonville Fortress, casting the obsidian halls in a pale silver glow. Lady Seraphine stirred from restless sleep, her thoughts still tangled in the chaos of the night before. The shadows that had attacked the fortress had vanished, but their presence lingered in her mind like a warning. Outside, the Moonville woods were calm, yet she sensed that the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Kalen was already awake, standing by the balcony. His golden eyes scanned the horizon, alert and calculating. Even in repose, he radiated strength and vigilance, a living embodiment of the forest's power. Seraphine watched him for a moment, a mix of admiration and apprehension stirring in her chest. "You're awake," Kalen said without turning. "Good, we must speak." Seraphine stepped closer, wrapping her cloak around herself. "About last night," she asked. "Or the shadows you said are still out there?" "Both," Kalen replied, finally turning to her. His gaze was steady and there was a rare softness there, reserved only for her. "The shadows were a warning, not the attack itself. Someone seeks to claim you again, and they are stronger than Alaric could ever imagine." Seraphine's stomach tightened. Alaric's betrayal had felt personal, but now she realized it was part of a larger scheme, one that threatened not only her but the fragile peace of the Lycan world. "What do we do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We prepare," Kalen said. "And you must understand, your role is not to hide. You are not a pawn. You are part of the balance whether you like it or not, and that requires courage." Seraphine drew a deep breath. She had always relied on planning and caution, but she now understood that courage was something else, something that demanded trust in herself and in Kalen. She nodded. "Then I will do what must be done." The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Seraphine trained with the Lycans, learning to move silently through the forests, to anticipate danger, and to understand the subtle currents of magic that wove through Moonville. Kalen was her constant companion, guiding without commanding, challenging without dismissing. Their bond deepened, not through words but through shared experience, through quiet trust forged in the heart of the forest and the halls of the fortress. Despite the growing closeness, Seraphine struggled with her feelings. The Lycan King was both terrifying and magnetic, commanding yet patient. She admired his strength, feared his power, and yet slowly she began to recognize a tenderness in him reserved only for her. And Kalen, in turn, was captivated by her courage, intelligence, and the fire in her heart that refused to bend before fear or authority. One evening, under a crescent moon, Kalen led Seraphine to the highest tower of the fortress. The forest stretched below them, a sea of silver and shadow. "You have changed," he said, his voice low. "Not only in skill but in spirit. You are no longer the woman who trembled at the altar. You have chosen to face the unknown, and that is the first mark of strength." Seraphine looked out at the forest, the weight of the prophecy pressing on her. "And yet," she whispered, "the danger is still out there. I cannot ignore it." "You will not ignore it," Kalen said. "But you will not face it alone." His hand hovered near hers, almost touching, and for a moment she felt the warmth of his presence as a shield. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That is the bond you chose when you followed me here." Her heart stirred at his words. The fear that had driven her now transformed into resolve. She realized that her choice was no longer about submission or defiance, but about partnership, with a man who understood both the fragility and the strength of the human heart. The warning came sooner than expected. Alaric, desperate and bitter, had allied with a powerful sorcerer from the human realm. Together, they sought to breach the fortress with magic stronger than any mortal weapon. One night, as the full moon rose, the sky above Moonville Woods turned black with unnatural clouds, and lightning danced like silver knives across the horizon. Kalen's pack gathered at his command, their eyes glowing with the same golden light as their king's. "They come," he said quietly to Seraphine. "Stay close. Do not be afraid." Seraphine's pulse quickened, but she did not move back. The courage she had cultivated over the past days steadied her hands and quickened her mind. She realized now that fear was not absence of strength, but the acknowledgement of it and the choice to act anyway. The first wave of shadows struck, twisted shapes that moved unnaturally, wielding magic that clawed at the air itself. Kalen fought with precision and power, his movements fluid, his pack moving in perfect harmony. Seraphine stayed at his side, using what she had learned to anticipate danger, deflect minor attacks, and guide others in the fortress. Alaric appeared at the edge of the battle, his face twisted with anger and desperation. But Seraphine confronted him, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your time has passed," she said. "You no longer control me. You no longer hold any power here." Alaric faltered, and the shadows he had conjured faltered with him. Kalen seized the moment, moving with blinding speed to confront the threat. The clash was fierce, but with the strength of his pack and Seraphine's guidance, they pushed Alaric and the sorcerer back. Finally, the darkness was expelled and silence fell over Moonville Woods. Seraphine leaned against the wall, exhausted but alive. Kalen approached, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "You did well," he said. "Bravery is not measured by strength alone, but by the courage to face what terrifies you." Seraphine's chest heaved. "I couldn't have done it without you." Kalen shook his head. "No, you could have. You chose to fight, to learn, to trust yourself. That is what makes you strong." As the night settled, a quiet calm enveloped them. The moon bathed the fortress in silver light, casting their shadows long and intertwined. In that moment, Seraphine realized that she no longer feared Kalen's power but welcomed it. She understood that their bond was not one of control, but of choice and respect, forged in trials and tempered by shared experience. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of connection. Kalen taught Seraphine more about the history of the Lycans, their rituals, and the delicate balance they maintained with the human world. She began to understand the weight of his crown, the loneliness that came with centuries of leadership, and the burden of the prophecy that had bound them together. One evening, they stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. The wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth, and the stars glittered like scattered gems. Kalen's hand brushed hers, tentative, almost shy. "You have changed me," he said quietly. "Not with magic, not with command, but with your courage, your mind, and your heart." Seraphine's breath caught. "And you have changed me," she whispered. "You showed me strength not as fear, but as protection. You showed me that I can face what I thought I could not." Kalen's gaze held hers, golden eyes reflecting moonlight. "Then we are both changed," he said. "And together, we are stronger than any threat, any shadow, any fear." The air between them pulsed with unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement that their bond had grown beyond prophecy or power. It was a choice, a recognition of shared strength and trust, and a promise to face the unknown together. The final challenge came not from Alaric, who had fled in defeat, but from the forest itself. Ancient forces, awakened by the bond between Seraphine and Kalen, stirred in the depths of Moonville. Shadows lengthened, whispers filled the trees, and the wind carried voices older than memory. But this time, Seraphine did not falter. Hand in hand, she and Kalen faced the forest, their courage intertwined, their hearts aligned. Together, they channeled the strength, wisdom, and magic of the Lycan and human worlds, confronting the darkness not with fear, but with unity. The forest quieted, the shadows receded, and the moonlight fell pure and silver upon them. Kalen pulled Seraphine close, a gentle but commanding embrace that spoke of protection, respect, and love. "You chose me," he said softly. "Not because you were forced, but because you saw what we could be together." Seraphine rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I chose you," she whispered, "not because I had no choice, but because I found courage, strength, and home with you." Kalen's golden eyes glimmered with emotion, centuries of loneliness softened in a single moment of connection. "Then let us face the future together," he said, voice low and full of promise. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." And as the moon bathed them in silver light, the fortress and the forest stood witness to a bond forged in trials, danger, and trust. The prophecy had fulfilled itself not through fear or force, but through choice, courage, and love. The Lycan king and the noblewoman, once strangers bound by destiny, now stood united, ready to protect their world, their people, and the bond that had made them whole.